How Islam protects women from exploitation. What if I told you that the very thing the world accuses Islam of, oppressing women, is actually the very thing it came to protect them from? What if the narrative you've been fed is upside down, flipped inside out, and missing the real story? Would you dare to open the door and see what's behind it? Let's start with a simple truth. Exploitation is everywhere. You see it on billboards where women's bodies are used to sell everything from cars to chocolate. You see it in offices where women are told to smile more, to be taken seriously. You see it in industries where women are treated as products, not people. And yet somehow Islam, the faith that gave women rights centuries before the West even considered them, is blamed for holding them back. Strange, isn't it? Here's the insider secret. 1400 years ago, when the world buried baby girls alive out of shame, Islam said, stop. Every daughter is a blessing. When women were treated as property, Islam said she inherits, she owns, she has a voice. When society silenced women, Islam said, let them speak, let them lead, let them be heard. That wasn't oppression, that was revolution. Think about this. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stood up when his daughter Fatima walked into a room. He kissed her hand, honored her presence, and declared, the best of you are those who are best to your women. Ask yourself, what kind of leader in a world that normalized female exploitation would say that? Not a man oppressing women, but a man liberating them. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a woman in 7th century Arabia, owning her own business, negotiating with men, hiring employees, managing wealth. Sounds modern, right? That was Khadija, the Prophet's wife. She was not hidden away. She was not silenced. She was a powerhouse. And Islam celebrated her not despite her strength, but because of it. Now, let's open another door. Why does Islam emphasize modesty? People rush to conclude it's about control. But what if it's the opposite? What if it's protection? Not because women are weak, but because their worth is too sacred to be reduced to an object of consumption. Modesty, in its true sense, is not about erasing beauty. It's about reframing value. It says, judge me by my mind, my soul, my contribution, not the length of my skirt. Isn't that the very empowerment modern women are fighting for today? And think about safety. Islam placed rules not just on women, but on men. Lower your gaze, guard your intentions, respect boundaries. This was centuries before harassment policies existed in the workplace. Islam didn't wait for hashtags like #FemToo to declare women deserve protection. It laid that foundation at the very start. But here's the twist. While the faith itself uplifts women, culture often betrays them. What people sometimes criticize as Islamic oppression is often cultural mispractice, not divine principle. The problem isn't Islam. The problem is forgetting Islam. That's why education matters. That's why reclaiming the true narrative matters. Because when you separate culture from faith, you see clearly Islam is a shield, not a cage. Let me ask you this, why is it in today's so-called progressive world that women are free but still trapped by beauty standards, trapped by industries that profit from their insecurities, trapped by a culture that claims empowerment while exploiting their bodies for clicks and sales? If that's freedom, why does it look so much like chains? Islam dares to break those chains. It dares to say, you are more than your appearance. You are more than your desirability. You are more than the roles others assign you. And that, my friends, is not oppression. That is liberation at its purest form. So the next time you hear someone say, Islam oppresses women, remember this. It was Islam that gave women the right to inheritance, to education, to dignity, to safety, to choice, long before the rest of the world even considered them fully human. Islam didn't exploit women. It protected them. It uplifted them. It made them queens of their own destiny. And here's the real challenge for us today. Are we willing to reclaim that truth? Are we willing to separate fact from fiction, culture from faith, oppression from protection? Because if we are, then we do more than just correct a misconception. We build a future where every woman knows her worth, every daughter feels her value, and every society recognizes that protecting women is the same as protecting humanity. So here's my closing thought for you. Islam is not a prison for women. It is their fortress. It is not their chain. It is their crown. And those who know this truth, those who live it, belong not to the margins of history, but to the center of its transformation. Remember this: the world exploits, Islam protects; the world objectifies, Islam dignifies; the world consumes, Islam cherishes. And if you carry that truth, you're not just part of a conversation, you're part of a revolution. Islam gave women rights to inheritance, ownership, and voice centuries before the West. The Prophet Muhammad honored and uplifted women, modeling respect and love. Modesty in Islam is about protection and value, not control. Islam set boundaries for men to protect women's dignity and safety. Cultural practices that harm women are not the same as Islamic teachings. True liberation in Islam is rooted in dignity, not exploitation. If you want to measure the worth of a civilization, look at how it treats its women. 1400 years ago, in a world where daughters were considered burdens, where women were denied the right to own property, where their voices were silenced and their existence tied to the will of men, Islam came as a shockwave. It was not gradual. It was not subtle. It was revolutionary. Imagine a desert society where burying newborn girls was a common practice, where a father, ashamed of having a daughter, would dig a hole in the sand and place her tiny body inside. Now imagine a message so powerful, so disruptive, that it declared this act a crime against humanity. The Quran thundered, and when the female infant buried alive is asked for what sin she was killed, can you feel the weight of those words? A society where women were discarded suddenly had to reckon with the idea that daughters were not curses, but blessings. That verse alone shifted an entire culture's axis. Let me paint a scene for you. In 7th century Arabia, a woman inherits wealth after her father's passing. Her relatives demand she surrender it, as had always been the custom. But this time she refuses. She knows that Islam has given her the right to inherit. She knows that her wealth is hers alone, untouchable by any brother, husband, or uncle unless she wills it. Can you imagine the power of that moment? A single woman standing in front of men who had always controlled everything, saying, "This is mine. My Lord gave it to me." That is not oppression. That is empowerment at its purest form. Contrast this with Europe centuries later. Women could not legally own property in most Western societies until the 19th century. In England, before the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, a woman's wealth automatically became her husband's when she married. For more than a millennium after Islam gave women financial independence, the Western world still debated whether women were even capable of managing money. Think about that. Islam had already settled the matter decisively and boldly, and it didn't stop at inheritance. Women in Islam were given the right to conduct business, to sign contracts, to buy and sell freely. The Prophet Muhammad's own first wife, Khadija, was a merchant who employed men, negotiated deals, and managed caravans across the Arabian Peninsula. He worked for her before he married her. Can you picture that? The man revered by 1.8 billion Muslims today, working under the leadership of a woman. And not just any woman, a woman who later became his partner, his supporter, his confidant. Their marriage was not a story of dominance, but of mutual respect. She believed in his mission before anyone else. She invested in it, and Islam honored her for it. Voices that were once silenced were now demanded to be heard. Women asked questions directly to the Prophet. They debated, they challenged. One woman, Khawla bint Talaba, argued her case so passionately about her husband's mistreatment that God revealed verses in the Quran in direct response to her complaint. Imagine the power of that moment. A woman's voice carried so much weight that it became immortalized in scripture. How can anyone call this oppression when the very foundation of faith was shaped by the courage of women speaking up? Even the right to choose one's husband often stripped away by culture, was firmly rooted in Islam. A woman came to the Prophet and said she had been forced into marriage. He gave her the choice, stay or walk away. She chose freedom. Her voice mattered. Her choice mattered. In a world where marriage was often a transaction between men, Islam placed the decision in the hands of the woman herself. And yet when the modern world looks at Islam, it forgets these stories. It forgets that while women in the West were still being denied basic rights, Muslim women were scholars, poets, jurists, and leaders. Aisha, the Prophet's wife, transmitted thousands of hadiths, shaping Islamic law and guiding generations. Fatima al-Fihri founded the world's first university in Morocco, a university that still stands today. These were not exceptions. They were the natural result of a faith that recognized women as full human beings, capable of knowledge, ownership, leadership, and voice. The tragedy is not that Islam failed women. The tragedy is that culture, politics, and ignorance often buried the very rights Islam gave them. But the foundation remains. The words remain. The revolution remains. Islam didn't wait for modern feminism to arrive. It laid the groundwork long before. It didn't wait for society to evolve naturally. It disrupted society and declared women are not property, not commodities, not secondary. They are equal in dignity, equal in worth, and entitled to rights no one can strip away. So when someone says Islam oppresses women, pause and ask, do you know its history? Do you know the inheritance law that shocked 7th century Arabia? Do you know the merchant queen who married the Prophet? Do you know the scholar who preserved half of the Prophet's teachings? Do you know the founder of the first university in the world? Or have you only seen the distorted reflection cast by cultures that forgot their own faith? Because the truth is this: Islam gave women ownership when the world denied them property. Islam gave women a voice when the world silenced them. Islam gave women dignity when the world buried them alive. And that truth is too powerful to remain hidden forever. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a leader. What do you see? Maybe you imagine a man seated high on a throne, stern-faced, surrounded by guards, his words carrying the weight of command. Now picture this instead: the most influential man in history, the one whose name is whispered by billions daily, standing to his feet simply because his daughter walks into the room. No pomp, no power play, just pure love and honor. That man was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in that simple act, in that gesture repeated again and again, he redefined what it meant to respect women. This was not in a world where women were celebrated on magazine covers or spoken about in speeches. This was 7th century Arabia, a society where female infants were buried alive out of shame, where women were commodities in trade and inheritance, where their worth was often measured in how well they could serve the needs of men. And in the middle of this harsh desert culture, the Prophet made it a habit to rise for his daughter Fatima, to kiss her hand, to seat her in the place of honor. What does that tell you? It tells you that in a world that diminished women, he elevated them. In a society that silenced women, he listened. In an environment that treated women as secondary, he placed them at the very center. Fatima was not just his daughter, she was his pride. He called her the leader of the women of paradise. He loved her openly and without shame, at a time when fathers often distanced themselves from daughters. Can you imagine the impact on the men around him, who had grown up thinking daughters were burdens? They watched their Prophet rise to his feet every time his daughter entered. It was not just affection, it was a public statement. It was teaching by action. If I, the messenger of God, honor my daughter this way, then so should you. And it didn't stop there. His words reinforced his actions. The best of you are those who are best to their women, he said. Not the richest of you, not the strongest of you, not the most powerful of you. The best of you are those who treat women with kindness, dignity, and respect. How radical was that? To define greatness not by conquest or wealth, but by how you treat the women in your life. It was a standard that shook society at its core, because it flipped the value system on its head. His life with his wives was just as profound. He listened to them, he consulted them. In the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when his companions hesitated to follow his instruction, it was Salama who gave him advice. She suggested he take action quietly himself, shaving his head and sacrificing his animal without words. And when he did, the companions followed. Her wisdom diffused a tense situation and changed the course of events. Think about that. A woman advising the Prophet in public on a critical political matter, and he listened to her without hesitation. That was not weakness. That was strength rooted in respect. And then there is Aisha, one of the most influential transmitters of his sayings and teachings. She debated openly, corrected misunderstandings, and educated entire generations. Men of knowledge, jurists, leaders would come to her for guidance. Imagine a world that barely allowed women to be heard, now watching as a young woman became the reference point for law, theology, and history. Who made that possible? A man who never silenced her voice, who encouraged her to speak, who respected her mind as much as her presence. His tenderness extended to the smallest gestures. He mended his own clothes. He milked his own goat. He played with children, raced with his wife, and carried his grandsons on his back during prayer. He normalized compassion at a time when masculinity was defined by dominance. He showed that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but companions. He showed that love expressed openly was not weakness, but the deepest form of power. Now step back and think of the message this carries to us today. In a modern world where women are often praised in words, but still disrespected in practice, his example slices through the hypocrisy. He did not just preach honor, he lived it. He did not just demand respect for women in private. He modeled it in public. He created a culture where men were forced to reevaluate what it meant to be the best. And here is where the story becomes timeless. Every father who chooses to treat his daughter like a queen, every husband who values his wife as a partner, every leader who consults and empowers the women around him, they are walking in his footsteps. The Prophet set a standard so luminous that even 14 centuries later, it still exposes the cracks in societies that claim to be progressive, yet fail to protect or respect women fully. So when you hear his name, don't just think of a figure from the past. Think of the man who stood up for his daughter, who declared that true greatness is measured by how you treat women, who listened to their counsel, who trusted their minds, who cherished their presence. Think of the leader who turned a world that exploited women into a world that honored them. And then ask yourself, what excuse do we have today to do any less? When people hear the word modesty, many immediately picture restrictions, limitations, or a set of rules designed to control women. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if modesty was never about taking away a woman's beauty, but about protecting her dignity, her worth, and her power from being reduced to a single dimension? To understand this, you need to step back and look at the world we live in today. Walk through any shopping mall and notice how women's bodies are used to sell products that have nothing to do with them. Cars, energy drinks, perfume. Scroll through social media and see how women are pressured to look a certain way, pose a certain way, and filter themselves until their natural identity disappears. It is not accidental. It is an industry built on exploitation, a cycle that tells women their value lies in how much attention they can attract. Now compare that to Islam's lens, which says a woman's worth is so much deeper, so much greater, that it cannot be reduced to an advertisement or a passing glance. That is not suppression, that is protection. Think of a diamond. When you see a diamond, is it lying out in the open, tossed into the dirt for anyone to pick up? No. It's kept in a velvet box, displayed under secure glass, guarded with care. Why? Because it is precious, because it is valuable. Modesty in Islam works the same way. It is not about hiding a woman's beauty out of shame. It is about elevating her value so high that no one can cheapen her. It is about reminding the world that her worth is not for sale. And here's the part people forget: modesty in Islam is not a command for women alone. The Quran speaks first to men: lower your gaze, respect boundaries, guard your intentions. It is not about telling women to cover up because men cannot control themselves. It is about building a society where both men and women are responsible for upholding dignity. Modesty is not a burden placed on women's shoulders. It is a culture of mutual respect where everyone plays a role in protecting one another's honor. Imagine a workplace where men are taught from childhood to lower their gaze and respect women, to never see them as objects, but as colleagues, thinkers, and equals. Imagine how different the stories would be if boys were raised with that standard instead of absorbing media that teaches them the opposite. Islam laid down that vision centuries ago. It said women are not public property. They are not entertainment. They are human beings with rights, with voices, with intellect, with honor. But modesty is not only about clothing. It is also about behavior, about the way a woman carries herself, the way she is treated, and the way she interacts with society. A woman can wear the longest garment in the world, but if she is still reduced to her looks, has modesty been achieved? No. Modesty is bigger than fabric. It is a shield against exploitation in all its forms. It is freedom from a world that demands women perform constantly for the gaze of others. It is the courage to say, I am not here to be consumed. I am here to contribute. Picture a young Muslim woman in a university classroom. Around her, peers may question why she wears the hijab, why she chooses to dress modestly. But inside, she knows the answer. Her identity is not up for debate. Her worth is not tied to external approval. Her value does not fluctuate with trends. While others may feel trapped by impossible beauty standards, she walks with the quiet strength of someone who already knows who she is. That confidence is not oppression. It is empowerment of the highest order. Now let's go back in time. In 7th century Arabia, women covered themselves not because men forced them to, but because revelation dignified them. It was an announcement. No longer will you be paraded or objectified. You are daughters of dignity, bearers of faith, and members of a community that recognizes your worth. That shift was monumental. It was not just about fabric. It was about rewriting the narrative of what it means to be a woman. So the next time someone says Islam's modesty is oppressive, ask, is it oppressive to say women are worth more than the opinions of strangers? Is it oppressive to free them from industries that thrive on their insecurities? Is it oppressive to declare that their bodies are not commodities? Or is that the very definition of liberation? Because the truth is simple: modesty is not a cage, it is a crown. It is not meant to silence women, but to amplify their worth beyond shallow measures. It tells the world, judge me for my mind, my heart, my faith, my character, not for the size of my waist or the shape of my body. And that message, my friends, is not just timeless. It is desperately needed today. Let's go back to the beginning, to a world that feels so far away, but whose echoes still shape how women are treated today. Imagine 7th century Arabia. The desert is harsh, the sun relentless, and society even harsher. Women were often denied personhood. They were passed along as property and inheritance, bought and sold as commodities, their voices silenced, their rights erased. A baby girl was not always greeted with joy, but sometimes with shame. Fathers dug tiny graves in the sand, believing the birth of a daughter was a curse they could bury. This was the climate, this was the culture, and into it came Islam, carrying a message so revolutionary, so disruptive, that it shattered centuries of injustice with a single declaration: women are not property, they are not shame, they are not expendable. They are human beings with dignity, with rights, with value given by God Himself. The Quran revealed verses that transformed the landscape of human relationships. For men is a share of what they have earned, and for women is a share of what they have earned. These words seem simple to us now, but imagine their weight then. A woman was no longer dependent on a man's charity. She had her own wealth, her own inheritance, her own economic independence. Picture a father dividing his estate and, for the first time in his life, being told his daughter has as much right to inherit as his son. Imagine the conversations at night in homes across Arabia, men confused, even outraged, but women stunned into silence as the truth settled in. God Himself had acknowledged their rights. Let me take you into one of those homes. A young woman's father has passed away. Her uncles arrive, expecting, as was custom, to take all of her father's wealth. But she stands her ground. "This is mine," she says, holding the corn in her hands, her voice trembling yet firm. They protest, they argue, they remind her of tradition. But tradition has been overturned. Revelation has come. And for the first time in her life, she is not begging for scraps. She is claiming what belongs to her. That moment is not just financial. It is spiritual. It is societal. It is history shifting under her feet. Now let's fast forward to Europe centuries later. In England, until the late 1800s, a married woman's property automatically became her husband's. Her wages, her land, even her inheritance, gone the moment she said, "I do." It was only with the Married Women's Property Act of 1882 that English women gained control over their own finances. Compare that to the 7th century, where Islam had already secured these rights. Muslim women were buying and selling, owning and investing, centuries before their Western counterparts. Think about that contrast. Which system was truly oppressive? Which one was truly liberating? And it wasn't just about money. Islam elevated women's voices, making them heard in spaces where they were once silenced. A woman named Khawla came to the Prophet to complain about her husband's unfair treatment. She was not dismissed, not told to be quiet. She argued her case, and her plea was answered not just by the Prophet, but by God Himself, who revealed verses addressing her situation. Can you imagine what that felt like? To live in a world where women were ignored, and then to hear your own struggle recited in the eternal words of Scripture. That is not erasure, that is empowerment. And then there were women like Khadija, the Prophet's wife, who owned her own business, who employed men, including the Prophet himself before their marriage, who managed her wealth with skill and confidence. She was not diminished by her faith. She was dignified by it. She was not sidelined. She was central. Her wealth supported the Prophet's mission. Her belief gave him strength. Her presence anchored him through hardship. She was proof that Islam was not about keeping women hidden in shadows, but about letting them shine in the full light of their God-given power. But perhaps the most striking example is Aisha, who became one of the greatest transmitters of knowledge in Islamic history. Men traveled across continents to learn from her. She debated, she corrected, she taught. Entire branches of Islamic law and history rest on her contributions. And this was not centuries after Islam's beginning. It was at its very heart. Her voice was not silenced. It was amplified. Her knowledge was not dismissed. It was celebrated. The tragedy is that so much of this story has been forgotten or twisted. People look at cultures where women are mistreated and blame Islam itself. But the reality is clear. The problem is not Islam. The problem is when people betray its principles. Islam gave women a voice, and culture sometimes silenced it. Islam gave women wealth, and culture sometimes stripped it. Islam gave women dignity, and culture sometimes buried it. But the foundation remains solid and unshakable. So when someone says Islam oppresses women, remember this: it was Islam that gave a woman her inheritance before Europe considered her a legal person. It was Islam that let a woman's complaint shape divine revelation. It was Islam that celebrated a woman's intellect as a pillar of faith. 14 centuries ago, Islam declared a revolution the world is still catching up to. And that truth is too powerful to be denied. There is a strange irony in the way the world defines freedom for women today. It tells them they are liberated, that they can dress however they want, speak however they want, live however they want. But look closer, and you will see the chains, invisible but heavy. Chains of impossible beauty standards, chains of industries built on their insecurities, chains of being told over and over again that their worth depends on how desirable they appear, how many likes they can gather, how much attention they attract. This is not freedom. This is a new kind of captivity dressed up as choice. And it is in this backdrop that Islam's vision of liberation glows like a light cutting through the fog. When Islam says a woman's value is rooted in dignity, not exploitation, it is not stripping her of power. It is giving her the kind of power that cannot be bought, cannot be sold, cannot be used up and thrown away. It is giving her a power that no marketing agency, no fashion magazine, no movie industry can manipulate. Think of the difference. In one system, a woman is constantly judged, praised, or shamed based on how she looks, her body treated as a product to be consumed. In the other, her body is hers, her worth is hers, her dignity untouchable, because it comes from her creator, not from the eyes of others. Picture a young girl walking through the hallways of her school. She feels the pressure to look a certain way, to mimic the celebrities on screens, to starve herself into a body that the culture says is worthy. And then imagine her discovering her faith, reading words that tell her, you are already enough. You do not need to mold yourself for approval. You do not need to compete for attention. Your worth is not measured in the curve of your figure or the length of your hair, but in the light of your heart and the strength of your soul. Do you feel how liberating that is? That is Islam's gift, a voice that cuts through the noise and says, you are priceless. And this liberation is not theoretical. It has played out in history again and again. Look at the scholars, the poets, the teachers, the entrepreneurs, Muslim women who carried themselves with pride because they knew their faith elevated them. Fatima al-Fihri, who founded the world's first university in Morocco in the 9th century, did not need a movement to tell her she was capable. She already knew, because Islam had given her the confidence to lead, to build, to leave behind a legacy that still stands today. Contrast that with women in other parts of the world who were still fighting to be recognized as legal individuals, and you begin to see the magnitude of this difference. But liberation is not just about what history records. It is also about the quiet, everyday moments where dignity triumphs over exploitation. Think of a woman walking into a room and knowing she will be valued for her mind, not her body. Think of a mother raising her daughter to know that she does not need to chase an image crafted by companies selling makeup or clothes, but that her true beauty lies in her character. Think of a wife who is not reduced to her role in the home, but is recognized as an equal partner, a companion, a voice that matters. These are not dreams. They are realities built into the DNA of Islam's principles. Now contrast this with what we see around us. A society that says women are free, but still pressures them to look forever young. A society that markets empowerment through revealing clothes, but ignores the harassment women endure. A society that celebrates choice, but rarely questions why that choice always seems to align with the profit of billion-dollar industries. It is a cycle that masquerades as freedom, but ends up being just another form of control. Islam dares to break that cycle. It dares to declare, you do not need to be consumed to be valuable. You do not need to be displayed to be worthy. Your dignity is yours, given by God, untouchable and unshakable. This is why so many Muslim women, despite criticism, despite stereotypes, hold firmly to their faith, because they know it gives them something the world cannot offer: real liberation. Not the kind that demands they constantly prove themselves, but the kind that lets them simply be. Not the kind that chains them to an image, but the kind that frees them from one. Not the kind that sells them a shallow form of empowerment, but the kind that grounds them in a deeper, eternal truth. So when people say Islam cages women, the reality is the opposite. It is the world outside that often cages them through its billboards, its magazines, its impossible standards. Islam is the one tearing down the bars, saying live with dignity, walk with confidence, shine with faith. That is liberation. That is freedom. That is empowerment in its purest form. My friends, the time for silence is over. The time for hesitation is gone. The time for truth is now. For too long, others have told our story. For too long, they have painted Islam as a cage, while ignoring the chains women still wear in the name of freedom. For too long, they have confused exploitation for empowerment and objectification for liberation. But we know the truth. We know that Islam did not come to bury women. It came to raise them. It did not come to silence them. It came to honor them. It did not come to cage them. It came to crown them. So tonight, let us make a promise that we will not allow the narrative to be stolen any longer. That we will show the world by the way we live, by the way we speak, by the way we honor our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our wives, that Islam protects, Islam dignifies, Islam liberates. Because every time a woman walks with confidence in her faith, she shatters a stereotype. Every time a man respects a woman as his equal, he breaks a chain. Every time a community lives the true principles of Islam, it writes a new story for the world to see. The world is waiting for that story. The future is desperate for that light. And history will ask us what we did with this moment. So rise with pride, speak with courage, live with conviction. Because Islam does not cage women, Islam crowns them. And if we live that truth loudly, unapologetically, and unshakably, then no narrative can ever erase us. Remember this, the world exploits, Islam protects. The world objectifies, Islam dignifies. The world consumes, Islam cherishes, and that is the legacy we carry.